Hi there. In this video we're going to have a look at how you go about using sources when composing a piece of academic writing such as an essay. Now we're going to look at what kind of occasions call for the use of sources, what kind of sources you should prioritise when composing your work, and also how to make sure that you make the link between the sources that you use and the point that you're making nice and clear. Of course, there are many different types of source you might use in composing a piece of academic writing. And indeed, the kind of sources that you'll go to most frequently are going to be determined by the particular degree subject you're studying. So those that are studying for a degree in a scientific discipline will probably find themselves going to journal articles that report the results of scientific experiments most often. Those that are studying law might find themselves going to case precedent most often. And those that are studying a subject in the arts might find themselves going to sources that document the work or body of work of another artist most often. But irrespective of the type of degree that you're studying for, the principles of good practice when it comes to using sources are broadly the same. So it's these principles of good practice that we're going to focus on. So let's start by considering some of the occasions that call for the use of sources. And the first such occasion might be if you make a factual statement that you need to substantiate or back up. Here's an example of what that might look like on the screen now. You might want to pause the video so you have a chance to read this properly. Don't worry if you're not familiar with the topic being addressed in this example, you don't need to be. You just need to take note of the fact that the text that appears in white font is making a factual statement. The text that appears in orange font is using a source to support that particular factual statement. So let's consider another example of when you might want to use a source. And that's when you're illustrating or supporting a particular theory, concept or theme. So let's examine what that looks like with an example on the screen now. As with the previous example, please pause the video when you're ready so you get a chance to read the text at your leisure, and then press play when you're ready to continue. Once again, don't worry if you don't understand or aren't familiar with the topic that's being used in this example, you don't need to be. All you need to notice is that the particular theory that's being referred to here is being described in the white text, and the orange text is then referring to a source that reports an experiment that illustrates and supports that theory. Another occasion that can call for the use of a source often occurs when you're trying to develop an argument or a line of reasoning. So let's examine what that looks like with an example on the screen. Once again, feel free to pause the video to give you a chance to read the text and press play when you're ready to continue. And as usual, don't worry if you're not familiar with the topic that's being used in this example. All you really need to notice here is that in the white text the author is beginning with an argument, and they're then using the text that's highlighted in orange to develop that argument by using a piece of evidence that substantiates the argument being made. So having identified occasions that merit the use of sources, let's have a look at some examples of text and consider how well they're doing in relation to their use of sources. So I've put an example of some text on the screen, and I'd like you to pause the video, read this text, and see if you can figure out whether it constitutes a good or bad example of using a source. Press play when you're ready to continue. So having had a look at this example, I hope you'd agree that this constitutes bad practice with respect to the use of sources, and the reason for that is very simple. In this instance, the author has failed to use a source to support an assertion that they've made. And you might recall from our consideration of occasions that call for the use of sources, the very first example we considered was when you make a factual statement or an assertion. In those situations, generally speaking, you should be using a source to back up that factual statement or assertion. So let's consider what might be done to improve the previous example of text. If you have a look at the text that appears on the screen now, you can see that the author has made the same assertion, which appears in white font. But this time they've supplemented that assertion with a source, which appears in orange font, that substantiates the assertion they've made. So this constitutes an example of good practice when it comes to using sources. Have a look at the text that appears on screen now. Pause the video so you have a chance to read it thoroughly. See if you can figure out if this is good or bad practice with regards to using sources, and play the video when you're ready to continue. Now, what you might have spotted when reading this piece of information is the citation at the end that appears to refer to a website. Now, the problem with using websites as sources is that they vary considerably in the quality and the reliability of the information they contain. As a general rule, websites don't undergo significant editorial or peer review processes, which means that sometimes, as in this case, they can contain inaccurate information. So let's consider what might be done to improve the previous example of text. The first thing you might notice about this revised piece of text is that the author is now referring to the theory by the correct name, i.e. equity theory, rather than social exchange theory. And if you look at the text that's in orange font, you might get a clue as to why that is. You can see that now the author isn't referring to a website source. They're actually referring to a journal article. And generally speaking, journal articles will use the peer review process, whereby they will send off submissions to a number of academics who are recognised experts in that field. And those academics will comment on things like the factual accuracy of the piece in question. Generally speaking, you'll want to use peer-reviewed sources when you're composing academic work. Peer review is considered something of a gold standard in academia. That's not to say it's foolproof, but you're more likely to find reliable and trustworthy information from peer-reviewed sources than websites. Have a look at the example of text that appears on screen now. Pause the video so you have a chance to read the text properly. And when you're reading the text, see if you can figure out whether it constitutes an example of good or bad practice with respect to using sources. Press play when you're ready to continue. The thing you might have noticed about this particular example is that although the author has used a source by way of a citation at the end of their text, the problem is the reader cannot tell from looking at this text how the particular source they've used supports the assertion being made. So let's consider how the previous example of text might be improved. Have a look at the text that appears on screen now. You might notice that the text that appears in white font is just a replication of the previous example, but this time it's been supplemented by the text that appears in orange font. And if you have a look at this text in orange font, what you'll notice is that its purpose is to explain how the source, i.e. the citation Bunk and Van Yipper in 1991, supports the assertion that's been made in the text that appears in white font. When you're using sources, it's very important that you make the relationship between that source and the assertion that's being made clear to the reader. You mustn't leave this for the reader to figure out, because the reader might not have the requisite knowledge to see how the particular source you've cited supports the point you're trying to make. And furthermore, it's up to you as the author to show that you can explain the relationship between the sources that you use and the points that you make. I hope you found this video on using sources in your academic writing useful. If so, please do hit the like button. If you're interested in how psychology can help you become a more effective learner, then do subscribe to my channel and consider turning on the notifications so you know when I post new content. Thanks very much.